Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction, tech, or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How's things in Seattle, Zach?
Things are good. The days are getting longer, which has been really nice. So, my son had a soccer practice last night that went kind of late, and it wasn't dark by the end of it, and it was great. How about you?
Meanwhile, I rode my bike home in the dark last night.
Sorry.
Springtime for you, autumn or fall, this part of the world, starting to cool down. And we've just had Anzac Day. So it feels a bit like the Christmas break here. We have Easter, and then sometimes that falls close to Anzac Day, which is celebrated in Australia and New Zealand to commemorate Gallipoli and other war efforts combined. So we end up with these sort of big, and that's school holidays as well. So we end up with everyone sort of coming back to work and getting back into things. And the other thing that tends to happen after Anzac Day, because it's always the 25th of April, and for us tends to be one of the first cool nights of the year. And I always remember when I was working in the industry selling insulation and heat pumps, they would always say that Anzac weekend is the weekend when the phones start to ring, when people remember what it's like to be cold again. It's the first morning of condensation on the windows, and it starts to be, you get to find the old blankets and pull them out. And that's happened. So, people have started to get cold again in their old, drafty, mouldy, cold houses. So here we go again into winter.
Right.
Yeah. All right, but we're going to talk this week about someone who's bucking that trend and making a great home for his own family, but also working to provide that for others as a passive house consultant in a beautiful part of the world. But before we get into that, let's thank our sponsors.
Absolutely. So the sponsors to the Passive House Accelerator are the ones that make everything possible, including this Passive House podcast. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minitaire All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors and Proseco. And thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. And thank you all to our great listeners and the wider community of Passive House Accelerator. It's fantastic to have this platform. And don't forget, you can always get in touch with us about anything on this show, or suggestions, questions, feedback. Just send us an email, podcast@passivehouseaccelerator.com. All right. Stephen Hughes is a passive house designer. He's got a background in construction project management and has worked with some of New Zealand's largest companies in the past, and worked on some very large projects as a project manager. So he's very good at understanding the process of putting together relatively complex buildings and everything that goes on in the industry, but has come into the world of Passive House and has also made a bit of a decision for himself and his family, and created is creating a pretty amazing lifestyle in a beautiful part of the country in the Coromandel here in New Zealand. Now, a couple of translations before we get into this, which are things that we talk about, which I kind of forget that some of the rest of the world might not know about. Of course, we've talked before about the translation in R values. So, Steve, we work in RSI R value here, so in the metric system. So an R value of 4 is, what do we say, Zach, around about 20?
Roughly 23, something like that, 22, 23, or 22, 23.
Yeah, so 5.7-ish is the conversion. So if you hear someone with a funny accent like mine talking about R value, then to convert that to crazy talk like you have in Imperial, what is it?
I don't know, we just call it R value. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Sure, I don't know what it is. Elephants per epsilon, I don't know. So the conversion there is about 5.7. The other thing that Steve talks about are these things called NOGs. And NOGs are a point of contention here, and rightly so. They're a horizontal brace in timber framing, or steel framing, but predominantly timber framing. They have different names in different islands here in New Zealand, and probably parts of Australia call them something different as well. But they are often done by standard builders or frame and truss suppliers who put in horizontal bracing between studs. And if you talk to most passive house consultants and even a structural engineer who knows a bit about the studs, they'll say they're actually not needed. So adding more timber into the frame increases the thermal conductivity of that frame, which is not useful for us in the passive house world, or anyone for that matter. But they tend to get put in by habit, or as the other excuse people use an excessive amount of timber framing is for fixings for cladding, which is also, I don't think it's a particularly good excuse. I understand the reasoning why, but what it means is that we're making decisions that are detrimental to the overall thermal performance of the building envelope, and letting structural elements take precedent over everything else. So it was a little bit of discussion about NOGs. So let's get into it. Great to catch up with Steve. Really, really good story about, like I say, his change in lifestyle. So I hope you enjoy it, and we'll catch you after the interview. Cool. Hey, well, thank you, Stephen, for your time. It's really great to catch up. I think we caught up, it was a few years ago now, at ProClimber, and you were, I think at the time, looking at a bit of a career change or asking about Passive House. Is that? Does my memory serve me correctly?
Yeah, that's right. It'll be a couple of years ago now. Around October 2019, my wife, family, and I decided we're going to get out of the rat race in Auckland, just continuously on the treadmill. We'd found a bit of off-grid bush down on the Coromandel and said, let's move there. Let's work remote. Let's do that. And because we're about 1 kilometre from any services with being off-grid, I said, hey, I've heard about this thing, Passive House. I think we should sort of investigate that a bit more for what we're going to build there. Makes sense being off-grid. And so we sort of went through the process of starting to buy the land. I gave my notice, 3 months notice in January 2020. And then in New Zealand, that notice finished and I finished up in the middle of our first lockdown.
Yeah.
So it sort of shifted from being, hey, let's work in construction, looking at programs, engineer to contract administration, to let's design our house and design our passive house and maybe come full circle back around to architecture and passive house design.
Yeah. What was the attraction to off-grid?
I think it was more so it was the piece of land that we found, which was the first one we looked at on the Coromandel Peninsula. We went up and down. We'd seen quite a few. And, we found one that we just fell in love with. And it was off-grid. So I think if this is going to be our bit of land, how do we do this?
Yeah, right. So it wasn't that you sought out to go off-grid. It was just you found a beautiful patch of paradise and there was nothing connected.
Exactly. And, of the last couple of weeks, I have thought, just working through quotes for our off-grid solar and storage, I just think, simple power connection would be so much easier.
Right.
But,
but
in the long term, it's more in line with what we want to do as a family and I guess as citizens as well.
Yeah. Sounds like you're on a building site at the moment. You still got some people banging away.
Yep. My builder's tapping away. He's building the service cavity on our passive house.
That's a very good thing to be doing.
It is. So we should try to get the plumber up here today, tomorrow, just to get some holes in the floor and can seal those up and start to line up a blower door test.
We'll come back to the project in a little bit more detail, but for those of our audience out of New Zealand, how would you describe the Coromandel Peninsula where you are?
It's beautiful. It's a peninsula that's on level with Auckland, so it's warm temperate. We get some really hot temperatures, easily hitting the 30s. We're up about 300 metres of elevation here. It's a big, long, rocky peninsula that stretches out into the Pacific Ocean. It is pretty much native bush mixed with pine plantations. A lot of the bush is regenerating over, between the last 20 years and the last 150 years. It was logged pretty heavily for kauri, and in which it was just pretty much clean cut, decimated. It's pretty mineral rich. It's full of hippies and greenies as well. People who like to live in the environment and look after the environment.
The place.
Yeah. So
it definitely attracts people who are after that sort of lifestyle and seeking a good life. Where's
to live in a natural environment?
If you pop into town, what's the closest?
Our closest town is Tairua, which is about 1,000, 1,500 people permanently.
Yeah. And
it just swells over summer, like a lot of the towns on the Coromandel. And even the weekend population with visitors from Auckland and Hamilton, both 2 hours away, lots of batches. They come, holiday houses for everyone internationally. They just come and visit.
Yeah. It is a stunning place and with its own interesting challenges as well, not least of which is, of course, thinking about where you're getting your power and your water and everything else.
Power and water and,
and
most
plumbers,
people are
I
on
guess,
tank water.
How easy, you mentioned getting a plumber on site, how easy is it to get builders and specialist trades up there?
Well, the beauty of living in a place like the Coromandel is you have access to all these wonderful natural resources. If it is a beautiful, clear, still day like today, you lose half your trades because they're out fishing.
Yeah.
And I'd say there's a heap out today,
Yeah.
starting to become blue nose season, so they go out for a week.
Right.
And the other half, when there's a swell, there's fantastic surf beaches, so
Yeah.
you lose the other half to the swell.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a Coro life, Coro time. Certainly a change in expectations, which I'm still learning to self-manage around timeframes and people getting back to you, as opposed to coming out of commercial building and construction in Auckland.
Yeah, well, because that was your previous life, was as a project manager on some pretty significant commercial and retail building projects. So I imagine you're used to Gantt charts and site meetings and fairly complex construction projects.
Yep. No, there's been a lot of. I've worked on some big ones, worked on some small ones. I think I was talking to someone last week, and they said, "Oh, can you describe your experience?" I said, "Look, I've been from doing $300,000 fit outs, just tidying up a fit out, to project directing up to 100 mil, and working on a team on about 4.3 billion pounds as well." So it's been very wide and varied, government, residential development, high rise, low rise, high density, that sort of thing. That's where I've been a bit more recently.
Yeah.
In that sort of sector.
Just interested in your comments on the state of construction, because you got a little bit of international experience in there, but a lot of your work's been managing construction in New Zealand.
Yep.
In that world, what were some of your frustrations, or what are some of the things that you saw that you think that we should be doing differently?
Ooh, good question. I think people tend to work in silos, be it design disciplines or trades on site. It's probably increasing that awareness and thinking about, how does my piece of work affect what everyone else is doing? And I know that's the role of the certainly the project manager, whether it's client side or construction side. But if you can get a team that's got that awareness, things go a lot smoother. Mm-hmm. You're going to have enough challenges and battles without battling within your own team.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, where people just stick to, this is my lane, this is what I do. And that's something we've tried to put together really well over the last few years. We try to match up our architects with our engineers so that that they work together and they both understand where they're coming from at the same time.
Yeah.
And you don't end up with issues when you get to down the design track and you go, particularly layouts, structure size versus walls, apartments. Suddenly you find your bathtub doesn't fit, or your washing machine, or your shower, and you have to throw the design out, or spend time to make it work. Make your layout fit within the structure and the design.
Doing redesigns on the fly.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas if you can set up the right team, get everyone on board, set the scene, I find it goes much easier. So I'd say that's probably the thing, is sticking to those silos, and also the good old Kiwi. It's the way we've always done it.
Right. So tell me about that and how that can. So that's basically what people just carrying on doing the things that they've always done, regardless of whether there's a
Nogs,
or being resistant to new ideas.
Nogs would be the example there, and I've had that here on my couple of little builds where I designed and built myself what I call a little passive shed, and the builder comes up and goes, "You haven't put your Nogs in." So don't need to.
Yeah.
Oh, but you have to. The 3604, which is the light timber frame standard in New Zealand, says you have to. And you go, no, it doesn't actually. There's actually a section in it which says you don't need to. Oh, but you've got to for your sheet or your lines. You go, well, if you read their literature, the technical information, where does it say it? It doesn't.
Right.
Get rid of that bit of timber, and you're reducing thermal bridges straight away, that sort of thing. But I've had that happen a couple of times where people go, "Where's your nogs?"
Yeah.
But we always do them.
Show us your nogs.
Yeah.
So that's a really good example. And other than having a fairly confident former project manager as their client, how does the industry change? How do we affect change with some of those dogmas?
Time and education.
Mm-hmm.
The question, I think we need to attempt to speed up the time. And I think it's potentially weighed down by a couple of things. If you look at the latest H1 changes, things like windows, there's still a bit of resistance around thermally broken aluminium windows within design, within suppliers. When I built my shed here, I inquired a couple of localish suppliers who they do advertise that they did thermally broken, and it was like, nah, too hard. No, it takes us too long. It's too much. It's not the way we've done it. And it's like, wow, really?
Yeah.
You're going to have to be there eventually. And I think it's a bit like the seatbelt analogy here in New Zealand. Up until the early 80s, wearing a seatbelt wasn't compulsory. And then it changed, and you had the mindset, I've never worn a seatbelt, I'll be all right. And now it would be a very rare exception if anyone doesn't wear a seatbelt, because we're nearly 40 years on. But I guess the question is more, how do we speed it up? So, we're not sort of going, we're at a really great standard of building in 40 years' time. How do we make that happen in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah.
And I think the approach we're starting to take in New Zealand is with that step change. Mm-hmm. And with the changes, you can see where we're heading. They didn't do increased walls and referring to the R values there as much as they could have, probably because of the interstitial condensation problem you might cause if you don't know exactly what you're doing or what products you're specifying. But you can see that change, where it's heading.
Yeah.
So the question, fast education program on what changes have been, and then what's the next, this is where it's going to go next, guys. So start thinking about it, get ready.
Yeah.
And it's, how do you start getting that message? How do you target it? Who do you need to target it to? And I know that's questions the Passive House Institute of New Zealand has asked, certainly at events like the Hui that we have annually, is at a bit more of a higher level, but I think they're things we need to delve into and get a good lobbyist on board potentially. And that's...
We've got a few of those behind the scenes.
Yep. We've got lots of really good agitators. Some of them maybe agitate too much, but, it's...
Well, and I think
it comes from the right place.
That's a key point, that agitating is different from effective advocacy and lobbying.
Yeah.
You can annoy people if you
and they switch off
for the sake of agitating.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's good to raise awareness, but I think you've got to have that constructive advocacy as well.
Yeah, and that's what I hope to do around here. Is I know I've got a couple of builders starting to have a look and think about things, and the style of construction that I've designed for our passive house and how we're going about things. Yeah, it's just sort of trying to introduce it.
Well, and you mentioned just before we were recording about people coming on site and being, stepping inside, not even a completed building, and say, "Oh, gee, this feels nice," or if it's a hot summer day and walking in there and, "Gee, this is cool inside here." I think those experiences have an impact, because that sense is much stronger than seeing a picture on a nice fancy website.
Absolutely, I agree, and that is part of the long-term build good marketing plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
is that, the passive house that's underway, 60 square metres, it's a minor dwelling, which incidentally, it's for a standalone house, you're right at the small end of making it easily work for passive house. And,
why is that?
Certainly, I'm shooting for premium being off grid,
Uh-huh.
and I'd liken it to a fridge. You get a little bar fridge, and the compressor, all the equipment inside keeps things cool, but it's the same size for, say, a 400-litre fridge. So
Right.
you're using that. You've got a minimum energy expenditure, but when you break it down by square meters at 60, it starts to peak a bit, get a bit high. Whereas if it was up around 70, 75, maybe even up to 80, the energy use would be the same, or it would actually come down per square meter.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm kind of at. And, it works for apartments at, say, 60 square meters, because your thermal envelope is, and your form factor is quite different than a standalone house of that size.
Well, an apartment, you have the advantage of having similarly conditioned spaces adjacent. So you've got
Exactly. So you don't need to count that that doesn't count to the form.
So for a smaller standalone, you get all the challenges of that sort of base level of energy required, like you mentioned. You also get it gets harder and harder to achieve 0.6 air changes if you're measuring that. If you're measuring airtight as air change rate as opposed to permeability, my understanding is that a smaller dwelling is much more challenging to comply with that, because you just because of the way the proportions work.
Yeah. So by default, I've picked a hard one to make physically work, or slightly harder than it could have been. But
yeah. Well, harder to work, but we also have to distinguish between working in the real world versus working for the passive house criteria.
For certification. It's in terms of thermal comfort, healthy home, great air quality. It's
super low energy consumption.
Yep, absolutely. It's a winner all day, every day, compared to the code minimum in New Zealand. It's streets ahead, but it's got. I've got to work a bit harder to detail it and model it so that it meets those strict certification requirements. Yeah.
So what have you got? Your 30 odd square meter
passive
dwelling.
shed. Yep. And then we've got the 60 square metre minor dwelling, which we're on halfway through. And then we'll move into that. We're sort of moving up. And then we're going to build, say, circa 160 square metre passive house, with the view that we might mother-in-law, friends, family, if they want to come and stay, they can live in the minor dwelling. Yeah. For a bit,
so your passive shed there, does that have any utilities in it? Is there a bathroom or anything in there, or is that just
no, 30 square metres was because it doesn't require building consent. So we are really super off grid with compostable toilet.
Nice.
Rainwater tanks, small little solar kit on the roof. Not uncommon on the Coromandel Peninsula, those sort of setups. Talking, it's interesting, the comparison. We lived in Ponsonby in Auckland, and we're saying to people at our daughter's school, we're moving, where are you going? Tairua. We've got a house there. We've got a house there.
Yeah.
Whereas down here, you talk to the locals, we're just moving in here, and they go, you're going to live in a bus? We had that question maybe about 3 or 4 times.
Wow, that's just the assumption.
Yeah. But we
you can do a bit better than a bus
for a while.
Yeah.
But so we'll do that, and with the houses, that's the plan. And nice garden that we can plant out, live off year round.
Sounds very idyllic.
It's great. It's sort of, let's make that life that we'd like to have now. It's got some different challenges than, say, the rat race, but it feels rewarding, and it feels like we're doing the right thing, and
nice
for us.
So your minor dwelling there, you mentioned earlier on you're getting you're at the stage of putting on a service cavity. So what's
Yep.
the construct? Is it a fairly standard construction, timber frame?
Yep, timber frame, 140 mil stud, so 6x2 framing with R4 insulation, and then 45 mil service cavity.
So now that's significantly more than what would otherwise be required, because you've already
Yep.
gone the extra mile with a 140 frame instead of a 90 frame, and then you're adding a services cavity on top of that.
Yep.
So that's going to be a wall that's about double the thicknesses of a what you'd need for code.
Yep. Again, increased performance. Also, we've got some beautiful views, the Coromandel offshore islands and the likes, and our main view is due east. So to take advantage of that, I've got some large bits of glazing facing east, which is, we've got a lot more than what you'd try to keep the ratio to. So I think we're somewhere about...
You've done the passive house modelling?
Yes.
And how does it stack up?
Triple glazed windows worked much better for us to keep the heat out rather than in. So that was a tick. Using external shading. So we're going to put a louvered canopy over the deck area to the east. And
so excessive heat gain is your biggest problem?
That's our biggest challenge there. So that's increasing the size of the insulation, all of that versus the code, and going to triple glazed PVC windows instead of double glazed, with warm temperate. Those were decisions made on the design and working through the balance of it in the modelling that says, that helps keep us cooler in the hot months rather than keeps us warm in the cool months.
Yeah.
So, and that was fun trying to figure it out along the line. And with the modelling, how do we want to do this? Because, in New Zealand, our architecture, our design of houses, particularly coastal ones, is let's get all the view in. Floor to ceiling, let's just glaze the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's super hot in summer, and it's expensive to heat in winter, and we wonder why.
Yeah.
So we took make a judicious view, pick out, frame some of the views, but we've got a big, massive sliding and fixed pane in there as well.
I really like that approach of being clever with the windows and framing the view, as opposed to just going the approach of just doing floor to ceiling windows, glazing the whole lot, which is I think it's kind of lazy, because you're just saying, well, there's the view, we'll just put glass in everywhere and then we'll not constrain it. But it's much harder and smarter to actually say, well, what is it about this view? How can we frame it? How are we going to use the space where we're going to be sitting to actually appreciate that view? Because my feet don't appreciate the view. So I've never quite understood I do understand it, but floor to ceiling windows really make sense.
No, exactly. And I think
they're also really pain for where to put your furniture.
Yeah. I think the view ceases to become special.
Yeah.
And it's there all the time. You don't notice it. And we've had friends through and they go, "Oh, look at Slipper Island. It's like in the window." And I'm like, "Yes."
Yeah.
That was the intention of
design.
The sighting and the view and the sizing of that window in particular that I can see it through. And it's just like, it worked. It's, and also people just picking it out and commenting. And we've done that with our shed here as well. We've made it behind it, we're right on the bush.
Yeah.
So native New Zealand bush, much less possums now. All native birds.
Which is a good thing in New Zealand. I have to make the distinction.
Yes.
Australia, not so much. We like possums in Australia, not so much in New Zealand.
No, they all they do is eat and breed very quickly. And they can just demolish the bush and there's more of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've successfully created a bit of a perimeter, and a large part of our land is in QE2 Covenant, which is Queen Elizabeth II Trust, which here in New Zealand you can gift land into it, and basically means it can't be developed. That's in perpetuity. You can't develop it. You keep it as bush. They come round and check it out every couple of years. You've sort of got to contribute to the upkeep and try and keep things tidy, pest trapping and control. And I'm listening to a lot of male Kiwi calls online because I'm becoming increasingly certain we've got a male Kiwi 10, 20 metres away out the back.
Interesting.
Which is, they are in the area, pretty wild.
Yeah.
Last year there was even one down at Tairua on Main Beach, walking up and down the beach at night. Yeah. So, that's pretty cool. It's a pretty special place.
It is a special place, and it sounds pretty idyllic. And you've created a great situation for you and your family. It sounds like it's not something that would be achievable by lots of people. Do you grapple at all with that, or is doing what you've done in any way, I don't know, selfish at all? Do you think, or just creating a nice little oasis for yourself?
No, I don't think it's selfish. At the same time, I think it is, and it's selfish for our family. And we made that decision. We'd had a tough couple of years in Auckland, lots of family things and all sorts. And my wife and I asked ourselves, "Are we living our best life?" And you go, look, 5 years, we'll be away, we'll get even more equity in the property, and, we'll be really good. The job will keep going, and, we'll really be up there. And you kind of go, we actually stopped and we said, are we living our best life? What's, 5 years, 10 years, we could change it. Are we doing it now? Our daughter's 7, and she just loves it. Recently, we've now got our 9-year-old niece living with us now, and she loves it. But just to see the growth in their confidence, there's a couple of families. We live along a road, at the end of a road that's a couple of kilometres long. We've got 2 immediate neighbours who pretty much have done the same sort of thing, kids the same age. There's a whole little group of them that play together, go together, and they just wander around in the bush.
Yeah.
It's
listening
great.
out for male Kiwis.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, they're all still asleep at that time. It's quite nice to get up and just have that kind of time and reflection early in the morning and go, is that a Kiwi? Can I hear it? Quick, where's that YouTube one? Where's that one? Not quite that one, maybe that one over there, but yeah. So, it's, for the family, it's great, and the opportunity that I think we've opened up to our daughter as well. Her confidence. They were down at Surf Lifesaving and on Saturday in the Rippers program, and they come out and they're out in the sea because there's the estuary on the other side. So it's a great location. If the sea's too rough,
that's amazing.
They go and chuck the kids in the estuary and do some training there. But they put them out in the sea, and they came out and they're like, I got smashed. It was so awesome. It was, it's just, it's idyllic, and it's really exciting and rewarding and comforting to think, to see that happen, to feel and go, we've made a really great decision for our family. And we know others are doing it. Not everything's for everyone.
I guess to my point, you're not a hermit either. We're having this conversation, which is, people around the world are going to hear this. You have tradies and builders coming and seeing it. I don't know what your future plans are, but you're going to end up with multiple dwellings on site. So whether that's just purely for your family, or there might be an opportunity to have passive house open days. So do you feel like that type of project that you're working on there has a potential to influence others?
Absolutely,
even though you are fairly remote.
Yes, I do. I mean, technology, you're always pretty close. New Zealand's close anyway. I've been the local communities run on chit chat pages on Facebook, so I've sort of been posting updates there.
Nice.
And planning. I've put it out there. Said, look, building a passive house, it's a bit different. Really keen. Who would be keen to come and see it if I had an open day during construction? And the number of messages and responses has been really large. So I'm thinking we're nearly at the interesting part.
Well, you've got to have a blow door party.
Combine it with my roof party now that that's on.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And just sort of get the service cavity and the first fix services in. We're just putting some battens on the ceiling. I was just working out with my builder this morning where to go. I said, do the laundry utility room next, because then I can get the silencers up there and out of the way, off the floor. That sort of thing. Start connecting those, making some of those connections, put some of the insulation in the service cavities, so can show people what the mix is, what the stages are. I still have some of the windows, how they're all taped up for air tightness and everything, and see how that all works. The flashing systems on the outside of our windows, so that we've pushed the windows back in line with the framing and our thermal envelope, rather than having them sit on the face of our cladding, as we often do in New Zealand.
All important stuff.
Yeah.
That's definitely, from a building point of view, the most interesting time to have an open home is that pre-line, when you've got the air tightness, the vapor control, all there in place and the tapes. You can whack the blower door on, and people get to feel it. I think, because that's the other thing is that, especially if it's a really cold day or a really hot day, you can have that impact, and it's not finished. It's not lined, and people's like, "Wow, it's not even finished yet," and you can feel the difference it makes.
Yeah, and it's just so silent as well in there. Especially,
how are you gonna hear the Kiwis if it's so quiet inside?
Well, I'm an early riser too, so I like to sit out on the deck and have my coffee, and
that's right,
write my journal and do my meditation first thing. So it's quite a nice backdrop to that. And it's quite, to be really selfish, it's quite a nice thing to have for myself a lot of the time. Love to share it with my family if they're up though. So, and ultimately that's the part. If we don't have family or whatever living in this one, we can Airbnb it and rent it out. I don't think there's a certified passive house that's available for short-term rental in New Zealand, but it also becomes a marketing tool for me for build good architecture and the passive house designers. I'm able to say, hey, look, come and experience it. Spend a weekend. Try it out. If you're not sure, if you don't know what it's about. Exactly. But even to be able to say, hey, I live in it. I believe in it. Come and have a meeting. Come and sit up here one afternoon. In the middle of summer or middle of winter. Have that experience. Well, anytime. And I know there's a lot of people in New Zealand, certainly in the that I've met and talked to, and passive house converts, high performance house converts, but we're not at a stage to be able to have our own places like that. So I think it's a real point of difference saying, I live the talk as well. Yeah. And absolutely. Even if you don't want to do I go certified passive house? Do I high performance, just making some changes, types of windows, how you set them into the building line, increase your thickness of your studs, more insulation, less timber, those sort of things.
No nogs.
You can just go, no nogs. Just experience that. Let's see how we can, adjust your design. Hey, look, frame the view. Don't just stick it in everyone's faces. A bit of shading. You could, sliding screens. If you can get
big fan of sliding screens.
Automatic, manual. How do you want to do it? There's all sorts of things. So, and I think it's easier to point to something and touch it rather than, we can watch all the videos, flick through all the magazines, but experience is always the best learning.
Definitely. Hey, where's the best place for people to find you and what you've got to offer now?
Cool. Our website, which is buildgood.co.nz, and probably follow our Instagram, which is all sorts of off-grid living and passive house building, which is buildgoodnz.
Nice. We'll link those up so people can find them.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you very much, Stephen. Really appreciate your time, and look forward to seeing more on Instagram and where else of that completion of the project. Hope the blower door test goes well.
I hope so too.
We might have to check back in and see how it goes through to completion.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Matthew.
Cool, thank you.
All right, cheers.
And that was Steve Hughes of Build Good Architecture. You can find him at buildgood.co.nz. Really enjoyed talking to Steve. Sounds like a fairly idyllic lifestyle out on the Coromandel. What were your thoughts, Zach?
Well, I definitely want to visit him. I hope that's okay with Steve. I mean, we haven't met yet, but yeah.
it's him, or you want to visit the Coromandel?
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it sounds like his family and he are making some very intentional moves, and it sounds like a really beautiful place to be, for sure. Listening to trying to identify those kiwis, and I thought it was entertaining to hear about the two kind of barriers to getting work done, where when the swell is high and when the weather's good for fishing. So all sorts of adjustments going. I mean, beautiful.
Yeah, it is a beautiful part of the world, and hearing Steve talk about that and being intentional. You're sitting down with his family and saying, what do we want our life to look like? I think it's quite a good lesson, because it's very easy just to carry on doing what you're doing where you're doing it, and that's a good analogy for the whole building industry as well. We can just carry on doing what we've done, but it's useful to sit down and think, well, what is the impact that we're having on our future generations, and how can we change that direction for better and to do good building, which Steve's living that. And I was a bit nervous about asking him, but I was certainly thinking, well, that's all well and good for you. You've got this beautiful part of the world. You can go and kind of live in the bush and be an architect. But what about the rest of us? And I think Steve responded to that quite well, that we are fortunate in the environment that we have, and it's up to us to make the most of that. But being in a beautiful location doesn't mean that we have to be isolated or minimize our influence on the rest of the world. And these days, it's so easy to connect with other people as we're doing now. You and I are on the opposite sides of the planet, really, and talking to other people, working with other people. Steve can do and does do passive house work all around New Zealand from his home in the Coromandel. So it doesn't, I wouldn't even say he's physically isolated, but certainly being away from a main centre doesn't necessarily mean you have to be completely isolated.
Yeah, I appreciated the question. Is it selfish? Definitely a provocative one. And I agree. I thought his answer was right, because he said, well, no, and then yes. And I think that combination is I think describes well a little bit of the kind of the conundrum that we have in making this transition to a cleaner, decarbonized economy, and thinking about our personal footprint on that. Certainly, he's coming from a place of privilege, as many of us are, to have the option to create this idyllic off-grid passive house with amazing views, and so there's that, but there's also something really, it's really important that all of us, especially those of us who are in economies and have lifestyles that are higher carbon, because we are more wealthy than a huge portion of the planet. It's really important for us to be figuring out how to decarbonize our lives and to making that transition. So it's like, yeah, there's the yes, and then there's the, but no, like there's, I thought it was great.
Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge that, but not feel got to get down on it, and make the most of the opportunities that we do have, which means, another good example from Steve is bringing people to his location, bringing builders in, open it up when it's finished to Passive House Open Days.
Yeah.
People are going to go there because it's a beautiful place, and if they end up coming and visiting and walking in to that environment and thinking, wow, this feels amazing, as people do when they go into a passive house, then he's influencing people. They'll take that feeling, they'll take that memory back with them, and it'll have a positive impact slowly but surely, one house at a time, but that ripple effect will broaden out. And Steve's already experienced that with the specialist trades that he's had come onto the site, and they've experienced what it's like to work inside that environment.
Yeah. And, it also reminds me of, I was just listening to a couple of podcast interviews with Saul Griffith. Are you familiar with Saul Griffith's work? He is an inventor and I don't know, he's a polymath, but was really instrumental in popularizing the notion of electrify everything, essentially, in the US. But he's from Australia, and now he's back in Australia, and he just wrote a new book. I think it's called The Big Switch, looking at basically looking at how impactful it is for us to switch from gas furnaces or oil furnaces to heat pumps, and because of the COP of heat pumps, the fact that that switch can reduce the heating energy used in houses by 2/3, and that there's a similar kind of benefit to switching to electric vehicles. So he backs up this whole narrative with all sorts of math, and it looks really doable to with some policy nudges to be making this transition to a decarbonized Australia, because I mean it's crazy how cheap rooftop solar panels are in Australia. And part of his narrative is that, this can be awesome. This switch can be great. And I think that while if we are going to get a whole bunch of people to be making the shifts that we need them to be making with their homes and with the way they do transportation and things, I think having a message of, look, this is a you can have a wonderful life doing, with these changes it seems like a vital thing. It needs to be part of the message. And so I think that's consistent with what you're talking about with, like, the experience that people will have when they visit that house. And it's, you don't need to apologize for the fact that it's awesome. Maybe.
Yeah, that's right. I like that. I like that idea that we don't have to suffer or have less of a lifestyle to be sustainable, to be zero carbon, to improve the way we interact with the world and the environment. It can be awesome. There's lots of opportunities to do things better that will also create a better lifestyle. It's nice to have that positivity and some technical solutions in order to achieve that.
Right.
Awesome. All right. Anything else from Steve?
No, I don't think so. Like I say, I'm waiting for my invitation to come visit. Just kidding, Steve.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to get you, because you're a keynote speaker now, so we might have to get you over to a conference at some stage.
That's right.
South Pacific.
That's right. Yeah, good point.
Tell us about some of the events coming up.
Yeah. So lots of stuff happening. Things are opening back up. We've got this big list of summits and conferences that are on their way in May and into June, including the Passive House Network's annual conference on June 10th and 17th, and Passive House Canada's conference on May 25th through 27th. More kind of immediate this week, we have I'll be speaking at the Humid Climate Conference in Austin, Texas, on the day after this goes live. Emu Passive has a bunch of classes that are opening up soon. Smart Plus Academy as well has a builder's course that starts May 5th. Passive House Network has a bunch of trainings. And then on May 6th, Green Building United will have its 2022 Sustainability Symposium. So we will have, and there's lots more that's coming up after that. So we'll have a link to all of the goings on in the Passive House world, at least that we're aware of, in the show notes.
Awesome. And don't forget, as always, you can head on over to the Passive House Accelerator website and check out all the great resources there. And also, if you're not already signed up, subscribe to this show, but also subscribe to newsletters and information so that you get all that information about upcoming events near you. All right, that just about does it for this week. We've got some other interviews lined up for the next few weeks, Zach. We sure do. Yeah, some great ones already. Awesome. Hey, well, thank you very much. Thanks to our awesome audience, and we'll catch you next week on the Passive House Podcast. Great. Thanks, Matthew.